Page 99, let's get into this. Looking back at our timeline from last week, the last event was the big event. July 4th, 1776. The day our country started with the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. We took the whole period Friday to talk all about that. Well, I'm sure when King George III got his copy, he went just like this. He went, "Oh, you guys want to have your own country? You don't want to be part of my country anymore? Why didn't you just say so?" Think that's what he did? No, of course not, right? He looked at this as part of his kingdom. So basically, we can declare independence all day long, but that isn't going to do much unless we what?
When our independent?
Yeah, we're going to have to win. Not just fight. Hey, we could fight a war and lose. Are we going to get our independence that way? No, the only way that we're actually going to be independent of his tyranny is to fight and win. Alright, now, does that make sense why the name of this war is the War for Independence? We're not fighting for our rights as Englishmen anymore, we're fighting for our independence from England. And we have to fight and win. You can declare independence all day, that doesn't mean anything. And if you fight the war and lose, well, then that declaration isn't worth the paper it's written on. You have to win, which means we have to defeat the most powerful military in the world and the bloodthirsty mercenaries, and we're just a bunch of farmers with guns. But that's our task. We have to do that if we want to have our independence from his tyranny. So we're going to look at some of the battles of our war for independence, some of the significant battles. Remember the importance of timelines, help us understand stories. Maps help us understand the story so we know not just when something happened, but where it happened. So the next event on our timeline up here is in December of 1776. We declared independence about 6 months ago. It's now December of 1776. What's happened in the meantime? George Washington had his army in New York City, and it didn't take him long to figure out that New York City was impossible to defend. There's just too many ways to attack it. So he decided to retreat into New Jersey, and the British Army followed him. And then he retreated into southern New Jersey, and the British Army followed him. And pretty soon, George Washington retreated into Pennsylvania. If you look closely at your map, the boundary line between New Jersey and Pennsylvania is a river. What's the name of the river? The Delaware River. Alright, so what he did is, he got his army and they took every single boat up and down the river and used it to get his army across. Now there wasn't enough boats for his whole army, so they took several trips. But they kept all the boats on the Pennsylvania side so the British Army couldn't follow them into Pennsylvania. So finally, George Washington and his army are safe on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River. Now, imagine you're in George Washington's army. What did you sign up to do?
Fight?
Fight. Have we talked about a lot of fighting yet?
Mm-mm.
No. There hadn't been a whole lot. Well, I mean, there's been some battles, but we haven't mentioned, but there's been a whole lot of marching and retreating, and the men are discouraged because they signed up to fight. Whatever they did before they became soldiers in this army, probably they were farmers, right? Maybe businessmen. But they left their farms, their families, their businesses behind. All the chores and tasks that go with running your farm are left being undone. But it was all worth it. They put their lives on hold because they wanted to fight for their independence. So they signed up for this army. But they don't ever get to fight. All they do is march, and the men are complaining. Oh, man, I wore out my shoes marching, but we never fight. Went from New York to New Jersey to South Jersey, now to Pennsylvania. All we do is run and hide. You know what I think? Men were saying, I think our general, George Washington, I think he's a coward. I don't think he wants to fight. He's great at retreating, not so great at fighting. And see, the men's enlistments were up on January 1st. It's already the middle of December, so just about a week or a week and a half, they are free to go home. Now, some of the men actually left before their enlistments were up, which is illegal. You could be executed for doing that. But George Washington hesitated to send soldiers out to catch the deserters because he was afraid those soldiers would run away. His army's getting smaller because men are deserting, and he's not even fighting battles. And come January 1st, the men will have to make a decision. Re-enlist and spend more time in the army, or you're free to go home and get back to work at your farm. What do you think many of the men are just gonna try to do?
Go back to the
Go
farm.
back to work at a farm, right? Because they signed up to fight and they don't get to fight. George Washington must be a coward, this is a waste of time. I got things to do. Alright, so George Washington knows he has got to get his men into a battle. We know he's not a coward, but he's also not stupid. Washington knows if he sends his bunch of farmers with guns toe to toe against the British Army, that's not gonna turn out well. He would lose his army. But he also knows that if he doesn't get his army into a battle, well then they're gonna quit come New Year's, and he loses his army. And this war's over before it starts. So, he finally makes a bold plan, because he got some intelligence from some spies. He found out something interesting. He found out that in nearby Trenton, New Jersey, check your map. You see Trenton is on the New Jersey side. He got a report of who was in Trenton. It was none other than the Hessians. Those bloodthirsty mercenaries. Remember them? King George III hired? And guess what? They're in Trenton. So George Washington, desperate to get his men into a battle, makes a bold and daring plan. He decides he wants to do a surprise attack on the Hessians at Trenton. Because he thinks, if I take them by surprise, maybe that'll even the odds a little bit. My bunch of farmers with guns might be able to do all right against the mercenaries if we can take them by surprise. But here's the problem. To take them by surprise, he wants to attack before dawn, in the morning, early in the morning, before the sun comes up, before they get a chance to get up and out of bed. Help even the odds. So part of his plan is he's got to get his men back over to the New Jersey side. Remember, I love to use paintings when I teach, especially from this time period in American history, because there's so many great paintings. This is the famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. So here's the challenge. He's got to get his whole army under the cover of darkness, because they don't want the Hessians or anyone to see that they're moving, right? So he has to wait till it gets dark. Well, in December, late December, those are the shortest days of the year. And that far north, in Pennsylvania, it gets dark about 4:30 in the afternoon, that time of year. So as soon as it gets dark, he starts loading his men on boats, and they're gonna make their way across the Delaware River back into New Jersey. But remember, he doesn't have enough boats for his whole army, so the boats have to go back and forth, take men to New Jersey, drop them off, go back to Pennsylvania, get some more, and so on. It's gonna take all night to get the whole army into New Jersey. And then once they get into New Jersey, they still have like an hour or so march to get to Trenton. And remember, they gotta get to Trenton before sunrise so they can surprise the Hessians. This is a bold plan, isn't it? A lot of things have to go just right. Well, things didn't go just right. First of all, it took them much longer to cross the river than they expected. By looking at this painting, can you see why it might have taken longer than they hoped? It's ice. This is ice. It's December and the river is frozen. This is a great painting. I don't know how accurate the painting is, right, because it was painted in the mid-1800s by what we call the Romantic era of art. So paintings weren't meant to be accurate, they were meant to bring out emotion of the event that they're depicting, and that's what this one does. So first of all, it wouldn't have been nearly that light, it would have been pitch dark. Second of all, Washington wouldn't be standing up in that boat, it would have tipped over. But whatever, we get the idea, right? It's cold. I'm not sure, but I think that guy behind him with the flag, I think that's Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers. He was one of Washington's right-hand men. All right, so here they are, crossing the river, and it's taking longer than they thought. So about halfway through the night, George Washington asks the big question, are we going to get the whole army over into New Jersey on time, because we still got an hour's march? I want to get to Trenton by sunrise. Is that possible? The men in charge of the boat said, we're going as fast as we can, sir, but it's slow going. The ice makes it difficult. Well, a couple hours later, Washington wants an update. It's almost morning. Do we have the whole army on the New Jersey side yet? And they tell him, no, sir, and is no way. It's gonna be morning before we can get the whole army over on the New Jersey side. What do you want us to do? And everybody looked at George Washington. Because after all, he's the leader, right? He's the commander-in-chief. You remember what that means, right? He's the top dog. Everybody asks him what to do. Does he have anybody to ask?
Mm-hmm.
No, he is the top. He has no one to ask. Now, I know that some of you are future leaders. You're already showing leadership abilities and things. But sometimes I admit I smile when I hear teachers or your parents describe what leaders you are. Not that some of you aren't leaders, don't get me wrong. But see, all of us, we make decisions every day, right? That's what life is. We make decisions every day, and those decisions will impact your life. Your life. You understand what a leader does, right? A leader makes decisions that impact other people's lives. Lots of other people. Leadership is lonely. So there's an old saying, it's lonely at the top. Because everybody looks at you to make a decision, and you don't have anyone to look to. And see, all of us have leaders in our lives, and when things don't go well, you know what we tend to do? We tend to blame the leader. Right? We'll say, stupid teacher, stupid coach, stupid politician, whatever, right? And sometimes justifiably, because they are the leaders and they made the decision, and their decision may have impacted us in a negative way. Right? So it's lonely at the top. Leaders have to make tough decisions, and they have to be decisive, and sometimes they got to make them on the spot. And here you are, George Washington, everyone is looking at him saying, what should we do? He has to decide. And let's examine his options. I think there's only three possibilities. One, he could wait until he gets his whole army on the New Jersey side, and then march to Trenton for over an hour. And by the time he gets there, it'll be the middle of the morning, and he won't be able to take the Hessians by surprise. You think that's a good plan?
Mm-hmm.
Bunch of farmers with guns against those bloodthirsty mercenaries? Probably lose that, right? Option two, he could go now with what he has, less than his whole army. Take the Hessians by surprise, attack them before dawn, but he'll be at less than full strength. Is that a good plan? You want to go and fight against the mercenaries and you don't have your whole army together? Probably lose. Third choice is he could just scrap the whole thing. Let's get the men from the New Jersey side back over to Pennsylvania where it's safe. This didn't work out. We'll just cancel the attack. Well, what would happen then? His men would be discouraged, right? Why didn't you just let me sleep? I was out in these boats shivering all night, thinking I'd finally get a chance to fight, but sure, no, we're not going to fight. Of course not. What a waste of time. 6 more days and I'm out of here. I'm going back home. And he would lose his army, right? So if he waits and attacks without taking them by surprise, he'll lose his army. If he attacks with less than full strength, he'll lose his army. If he doesn't attack at all, he'll lose his army when they don't re-enlist. So it's bad choice, or bad choice. And everybody's looking at him. What should we do, sir? Well, he has to decide, doesn't he? He has no one to ask. He is the top dog. He is the commander-in-chief, and he has to decide now. And that's what leaders do. So you want to be a leader, remember, it's lonely at the top. Your decisions are going to affect a lot of people. His decision isn't just going to get him fired if he makes the wrong one. If he loses his army, that means we lose this war. If we lose the war, there is no independence. We're all going to live under King George's tyranny. And obviously that means we're not here telling any stories because there is no America. So I think we can all figure out he made the right choice. So here's what he decided. He said, we're gonna wait. Wait for the whole army to get over here to New Jersey. So they did. Because of the ice, it took a while. By the time the whole army got to New Jersey, it was already sunrise. They should have already attacked by now, and they still got an hour march to Trenton. And as if this day couldn't get any worse, it just got worse. Here comes a storm, a bad winter storm. It's snowing heavy. It's a blizzard. See, when there's a blizzard, it's not just heavy snow, but there's high winds blowing not just the falling snow around, but the snow that's already on the ground gets blown up into the air, and it's what we call a whiteout. So as men are marching in this blizzard, and they literally, if you put your hand out in front of you, they could not see their own hand from this blizzard. So they were holding on to the shoulders or hips of the guys in front of them, marching through this blizzard so they wouldn't lose their way, because they couldn't see each other. They're poorly equipped. Many of these men don't even have shoes. They've worn out their shoes. All these marching for all these months. So they're barefoot in the snow. But they're willing to make this march because they're itching for a fight, remember? They signed up to fight. Finally, we get to fight today. So they endure it. They march through this blizzard. When they get to Trenton, it's already the middle of the morning. They get to the town, and they see a little stone cottage where the Hessian commanders are inside sleeping. Chimney with smoke coming out. They look out across the fields, and they see all the canvas tents where the Hessian soldiers spent the night. But the crazy thing is, even though it's the middle of the morning, the Hessians are not up and at them. There's not even any guards posted. What's going on? Well, it looks like George Washington and his men will be able to take the Hessians by surprise after all. Wait, let's think about this. What day is it? I give you a hint. I forgot to mention to you. They crossed the river on Christmas night. They left on Christmas night. So this is the day after Christmas, right? And where are the Hessians from?
Germany.
Oh, they're from Germany, right? Now, I don't know if you know this, but part of the German culture, what are they famous for as far as a beverage in Germany?
Oh, beer.
Beer. These bloodthirsty mercenaries, do you think any of them might have been beer drinkers?
A little bit.
Probably. Some of them, most of them, all of them maybe. And it was Christmas. They did what Germans do. They had a party. They had a Christmas party. Probably had too much to drink. So this morning, they're sleeping in. They're hungover. Besides, who wants to get up early in this kind of weather? And besides, on top of that, there's no enemy that the Hessians have to worry about. George Washington and his army, where do they think they are? Way over in Pennsylvania, across the Delaware, right? So no reason to get out of bed, your cozy bed, when you're hungover from your party on such a blizzardy day. Just sleep in, right? So George Washington and his men are going to take the Hessians by surprise after all. So Washington nods to his right-hand man, young man named Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton tiptoes up to a little stone cottage where the Hessian commanders are sleeping, pulls his knife out of his sheath. George Washington nods to him. Hamilton opens the door. Quiet. He tiptoes in. He's in there for a few minutes. Comes back out the door, wiping the knife off on his pant leg, puts it back in his sheath and nods to Washington. What did he just do?
He killed him.
Yeah, he cut the Hessians' throats, the commanders, in their sleep. So they won't have anyone to give them orders. And you guys carry that man's picture around in your wallet. That's Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill. He's not just the title of a musical, he's one of our founding fathers. And he was a warrior in the War for Independence. All right, well then George Washington gave the order to attack, took the Hessians by surprise. They're awake now. All right, and they're looking for their gun, and they're looking for their pants, and they're looking for their commanders to give them orders. They don't have any orders to follow because not all of them, but many of their commanders have been killed. And George Washington and his men win the battle. They capture over 900 Hessians, take them as prisoners. So much for those mercenaries, right? What a victory. Do you think George Washington's men think he's a coward anymore? No. What an awesome plan. All right, they thought he was awesome. They finally got to fight. Come January 1st, do you think they're ready to go home or think they're ready to re-sign up for more time in the army? Yeah, they're going to re-sign. And that is right here. December 1776, defeated the Hessians at Trenton, which is in New Jersey.
Was it the whole Continental Army?
It was the largest part of the Continental Army. All right, you can see the next event is just a few weeks later in January of 1777. That's a battle at Princeton, New Jersey. You can find Princeton on your map. Not far from Trenton, right? See where this takes place. There's a British general by the name of General Cornwallis who just found out what happened in Trenton. It's like, wait, what? I thought George Washington's men were in Pennsylvania. And he's being told, no sir, they just defeated the Hessians at Trenton. They're over here in New Jersey. So Cornwallis decides to give Washington a taste of his own medicine. He's going to do a surprise attack on Washington's army. He's going to attack at night. So he finds out where Washington's army is camped. He surrounds it, and then Cornwallis gives the order to attack, and the British soldiers charge in to the Americans' camp, and there's nobody home. George Washington knew they were coming, had his men slip away in the darkness, but he ordered them to leave their campfires burning to fool the British into thinking they were still there. Pretty clever, huh? And then later there was a battle at Princeton, and it was a victory for who?
The Colonial?
Yeah, the good guys, right? George Washington. A victory at Princeton, which is also in New Jersey. Now there's a cool sentence in your book. If you look on page 100, right before the subheading about Saratoga, look at the last sentence. It was a British observer said, and this is in quotations, a few days ago, the Americans had given up the cause for lost. Now they are liberty mad again. Liberty means freedom, right? Mad, not like in angry, but mad like in crazy. In other words, he's saying just a couple of days ago, the American soldiers were so discouraged. They thought Washington's a coward. They just wanted to quit and go home. But now, after victories at Trenton over the Hessians and at Princeton over the British, they're freedom crazy. Their morale is high. They're riding these victories. Two big upsets, right? That'll do a lot. Get your spirits up. Any questions on Trenton or Princeton? All right, if you look on our timeline here, the next event is October 1777. So several months later in the same year, we have another victory at Saratoga. Now here's where maps come in. Check your map, find Saratoga. Where is Saratoga? Maddox?
On the Hudson River.
Yeah, way up north, isn't it? Along the Hudson River. It's in New York. Not New York City, but way up north of that, right? Way up in New York is the Battle of Saratoga. And this is an American victory, but I don't want you to be confused. This is a different part of the American Army. This is, George Washington was not at Saratoga. Can't get there that easily, right, in those days. But it's a big victory. We're not gonna go into the details. Here's what you need to know about Saratoga. Look what I put up here. Saratoga is the turning point of the war. Saratoga is the turning point of this war for independence. Here's what we mean by that. See, how could I explain this? When I watch football, my favorite team in the NFL, well, I guess my favorite team was the Washington Redskins, but now they're not the Redskins. Now it's the Washington football team, if you're following that. So when I watch the Washington football team play, my heart, I'm rooting for them, but I usually know they don't have much chance of winning because they're not very good. All right, and they usually lose. So let's say I had $5 and I had to bet. Do you think I would bet for the Washington football team, or do you think I would bet for their opponents?
Their opponents?
I'll probably bet for their opponent. Even though I'm rooting for them, I gotta use my brain, right? They're probably not gonna win. All right, so back to this. Before Saratoga, if you had $5 and you had to bet on either the bunch of farmers with guns or the most powerful military in the world, even though you might be rooting for those Americans, the smart bet would have been on the British, right? That's true, until Saratoga. That's what we mean by turning point. After Saratoga, the smart bet would have been on the Americans, and here's why. Because we're gonna get some help. It's not just gonna be us. There's a European country that's gonna join the war on our side. What country am I talking about?
France.
France is gonna join the war on our side. See, here's what I haven't told you. Remember Ben Franklin? Right? He's kinda old and kinda portly, and he's not gonna be able to be a soldier. But what he did when the fighting started, he took a ship and went to France, and he's been over there bugging the French leaders, saying, hey, you should help us fight Britain. And France is like, I don't think so. Alright? We keep losing wars to Britain, because France and Britain are longtime enemies, right? But France keeps losing wars, and they're like, we don't wanna lose any more wars to Britain. And Ben Franklin's trying to convince them, yeah, well, last time when you lost to Britain, we were on Britain's side. This time we'll be on your side. Maybe you could win. Yeah, I don't think so. Until after Saratoga. When the French saw that we won at Saratoga, they thought, you know what, you guys are doing pretty good. Just imagine, with our help, maybe we could actually win a war against Britain for a change. So now, after Saratoga, from here on out, rest of the war, it's the most powerful military in the world, Britain, against a bunch of farmers with guns and the British Army. And the French Army. And get this, the French Navy. We don't have a Navy, but France did, and that will help negate Britain's Navy. Now, does it make sense why we call Saratoga the turning point? Because from there on out, we got help. France is on our side. That's gonna make a big difference. All right, so we have victories at Trenton, a victory at Princeton, a victory at Saratoga. Hey, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. They weren't all victories in between. All right, there were some defeats too, and there's some hard times still to come in this war. In fact, the very hardest time of the whole war happens. Look what's next. in the winter of 1777 and 78. In fact, this is some of the most difficult time of suffering of any Americans in our entire history, is the winter at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. So to understand that, look at your battle map. You see Philadelphia, right? Well, here's what armies did in those days. They didn't really want to fight during the winter for obvious reasons. It's really cold and uncomfortable, and not just hard to move your soldiers, but really hard to move supplies. So you gotta supply an army. That's a lot of food and everything, and really hard to move the big heavy cannons through deep snow. So what would happen usually in the winter is both armies would find a place to kind of hunker down, spend the winter, and then when the spring comes, thaws out a little bit, they'll resume the battles. So, check your battle map, find the battles of Germantown and Brandywine. They're on the Pennsylvania side. See Germantown and Brandywine? Who won both those battles?
British.
The British. And that meant that the British Army would get to spend the winter in Philadelphia. That's a big advantage for them, because Philadelphia is a city with lots of nice warm buildings and cozy fireplaces. So all winter long, the British soldiers are sitting by a nice cozy fire, drinking hot chocolate, sleeping in warm cozy beds at night with plenty of food to eat, getting fat and sassy, and well rested all winter. In the meantime, George Washington and his army had to find somewhere else to spend the winter, and they end up in a little valley in Pennsylvania called Valley Forge. And there are no buildings. They just, excuse me, built shelters as best they could to block them from the wind. It's extremely cold. What temperature does water turn into ice?
Like 30, I
32
think?
degrees.
32 Fahrenheit, right? Well, at Valley Forge for a lot of the winter, it's not 32. The temperature's like 0, like 32 degrees below freezing. It's bitter cold. And remember, they don't have good buildings or shelter. Most of the men don't have clothes. They're wearing rags. Very few coats. Some men no shirts. Most men no shoes. This is gonna be a cold winter. Biggest problem, no food. George Washington could not find enough food to supply his army. They're barely getting enough food to survive. Now, with not good nutrition and poor shelter and cold weather, you think someone might get sick? Yeah, and then they're living in these tight quarters with other men trying to stay warm. That means everybody's gonna get sick. So all the men were sick with like dysentery, which means diarrhea. That's no fun, is it? There's no bathrooms, Valley Forge, and it's cold out there, and everybody's sick.
That'll be some gross snow.
It's making me grossed out too. It's a long, suffering winter. And many of the men are experiencing frostbite. Let me explain frostbite. We don't deal with that in Florida, right? We have to deal with heat exhaustion. But frostbite, that's not one of our issues. So what that means is anything that's exposed to these really cold temperatures for too long, like the ends of your fingers or your toes or your ears or your nose, and they don't have enough clothes to keep warm, the ends of those will freeze. Like, we're made of cells, right? So the cells freeze, and a cell is mostly water. And when water freezes, it crystallizes. So when those cells freeze and crystallize, they die. Kills the cells. And then once the cells are dead, they do what anything dead does, it starts to decay and rot. And it'll turn black. And it's extremely painful. It'll bleed, maybe eventually fall off your dead, rotted flesh from frostbite. This is a long winter. The trails in the snow at Valley Forge were stained with blood from their frostbitten feet. They're hungry, they're cold, and there's no relief for either one. You've never been cold. Especially if you spend your time for the coldest day in Florida. Trust me, you've never been cold. Even if you've been up north and you've been outside and you shivered a little bit, it wasn't long till you could go in and warm up. I grew up north and hunting with my dad. I got really cold a few times, but I could always end up in the truck, turn on the heater and warm up. Or if I'm out playing in the snow as a kid, I'd go in and sit by the fireplace and warm up. These guys were cold, without relief, all winter. Hungry. Trust me, you've never been hungry. You think you have, but you've never been hungry. You've had appetite. I even say it, these days where our schedules, we don't get to lunch till late. I'm like, man, I'm starving. No, we're not, right? We don't know what it is to be hungry. We skip one meal, we think we're hungry. These guys would go weeks between meals. That's true hunger. They're sick, they're hungry, they're cold, they're suffering. Some men snap, can't take it. They start wandering off into the woods, or they finally freeze to death. His army's getting smaller. Men are dying or running away every day during that winter at Valley Forge. They're not even in battles. It's a rough winter. Now George Washington, he's the boss. He's the commander-in-chief. He could have left, found a good cozy spot to spend the winter, tell his men, hey, you guys hang in there. I'll see you in the spring. But he didn't do that because he's a real leader. He decided to stay with his men and suffer alongside of them all winter. And to encourage them, he gave orders to some of the educated soldiers to walk around the camp reading out loud, because these are long, endless days of misery. So at least you could hear someone reading out loud. And the things that he had read aloud, two things. One is the Bible. That's a good one, right? We can all find encouragement in God's Word. And the other thing he had read aloud, Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Think about those words we talked about last week. These are the times that try men's souls. Oh, that is a whole new meaning if you're living through Valley Forge, isn't it? These are tough times. These are not normal times. This is a time of suffering. If you live through Valley Forge, anybody gonna call you a sunshine patriot, summer soldier? I don't think so, right? You'll be a true tough guy if you can live through this winter. Well, there's a painting that's one of my favorite paintings. I'll show it to you. This is simply known as Washington's Prayer at Valley Forge. There's several versions of it. This is my favorite one. There's a great story that goes with this painting. But before we get to the story, what I like about it so much is that we get a sneak peek. We can tell what George Washington, the father of our country, we can get a peek into what his true character is. But before the story, again, I want to talk to you about character. See, sometimes we get confused. See, character is the quality of person that each of us really is. I mean, some people are people of good character, and some people are people of questionable character, right? Some people aren't very good quality people. They're all people, God loves them all, but not all people are of quality character. And see, there's two, we get confused because sometimes we confuse reputation with character. There's a difference. Let me explain. Your reputation is what other people think of you. And that's important, right? We should all strive to have a good reputation. It's something very, very valuable. And we all want a good reputation. It's what other people think you are. Your character is what you really are. And see, there's nobody in the world that knows your true character except you and God. because the best description to understand character I've ever heard, wouldn't call it a definition, but to help you evaluate your own character, I've heard this. Your character is revealed by what do you do when you know there's no way anyone else will ever find out. Hear that? What do you do when there's no way anyone else will ever find out? That is your true character. And see what I mean? There's no way anyone can know your real character except for you and God. Because that's the whole point, no one can find out, no one finds out. So see what I mean? Your reputation might be the same as your character, but not necessarily, because our reputation is what we let other people see, so they think well of us. Our character is what we do when there's no way anyone else will find out. Do we do what's right or not? And nobody knows that except God and ourselves. So you know my reputation, I know your reputation, but we can't really know each other's character. But I just told you that we can know George Washington's character. Well, how is that possible? Well, because he got caught doing what he does when there's no way anyone else will find out. And that's the story of this painting. But we're out of time, so I'm gonna have to tell you that story tomorrow. So Ethan, I got another job for you. Tomorrow, you remind me, first thing we gotta do is tell the story of the Prayer Valley Forge.
Okay.